Last week, headstones were toppled at a Jewish cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri.
Police are investigating a slew of bomb threats targeting Jewish community centers all across the country today.
I was just ice skating in New York City. Two Israel hater anti-Semites, pro-Hamas. They both just said, "Free Palestine."
You came over to me on the ice in Bryant Park and harassed me with Free Palestine.
I said Free Palestine. And I gave you a fist bump, and you didn't want to.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
Alone! They want our people dead! They want us killed!
And so part of
They want us dead!
So that girl's tears are for sure real, as is her fear. But if you look more closely at the signs that she's interpreting to be a call for the death of her people, you'll see that they have nothing to do with the eradication of Jews. But she genuinely believes that the pro-Palestinian protesters are anti-Semitic. And there are many people like her who believe that anyone who stands up for the rights of Palestinians, the rights of Palestinians to self-determination, is being anti-Semitic. Even Jews who are standing up for Palestinians are accused of being anti-Semitic.
I'm called anti-Semitic because I'm against Israel's treatment of Palestinians. But those shut down debate. And whether it be comedy or discussion or anything else, if we don't have the wherewithal to meet each other with what's reality, then how do we move forward?
And like Jon Stewart says, projecting anti-Semitism onto the Palestinian cause is a refusal to look at reality. And it's a refusal to investigate why are people in support of Palestine. It's like pretending that all those people who are asking for a ceasefire, who are asking for the bombing to stop, for food and aid to reach Palestinians, these are all just simply bigots who hate Jews. There was actually a group of Jewish students who took shelter in a library in New York.
This video shows a group of Jewish students standing in the Cooper Union Library as other students chant "Free Palestine" outside locked doors and hold up signs outside the glass.
It was tense. People were nervous. People were nervous.
Cry me a river. Oh, cry me a river.
Sorry, I couldn't help but get sassy over there. But jokes aside, the fear that these young Jewish students are experiencing is actually very real. Their nervous system is hyper-vigilant as it looks out for threats against them as Jewish people.
Whether it's true or not isn't the issue. That's the feeling in that community. And if you don't understand that that's where it's coming from, then you can't deal with it. And if the point of all this is then to heal people, the only way to heal a wound is to open it up.
And as painful as it is to open that wound, we need to do it. We need to look at why someone's nervous system would be so shot that they see anti-Semitism where it isn't. So if we are to open that wound, is this the unresolved trauma of the Holocaust being passed down from generation to generation? Because unresolved trauma does affect our stress response. It actually makes an imprint on our genetic makeup and our biology. That's the nature of traumatic memory. Take, for example, when you're fighting with a loved one, if someone who knows you very well, like a family member or a partner, someone who knows your history. Whenever you're fighting, you're always fighting about so many older stuff as well. It's never just the present moment. Like the past, especially the unresolved part of the past, always finds its way into the fight. So this can happen on a personal level when you're fighting with someone, but also on the collective sense for a group of people who grew up in the shadow of something as horrific as the Holocaust. For people who are carrying that kind of pain, that very real pain, the Palestinian cause is a very good place to project your fears of anti-Semitism. And that's because Israel pretends to speak for all Jews. So any resistance to Israeli occupation is going to feel like resistance to Jews.
You know, these so-called leaders in the Jewish community who entire work is the work of terrorizing the people they claim to represent. They want to keep Jewish people terrified.
And that's why those Jewish students on university campuses in the US are breaking down, are having genuine nervous breakdowns the second they see a flag, a Palestinian flag or a scarf. Just imagine how confused your nervous system has to be for you to interpret a sign or a scarf or a chant like Free Palestine as a call for your death. And this is not to be disrespectful toward those students who are having those breakdowns, because anyone who's experienced severe anxiety knows what it's like to be overreacting and you can't even stop yourself. The fear is very real in your body. Have you heard of epigenetics? That's basically the study of how our environment can affect the way our genes work. And epigenetic trauma is the study of how traumatic environment can affect the way our genes work. And this epigenetic trauma is actually the basis of my analysis in this video. And my guests this week, my Lipsync guests this week, have a lot to say about that.
Epigenetic trauma has been proven in scientific literature in terms of things like cortisol and stress response, right? Where the generation removed from people who have experienced mass violence have a more exaggerated stress response to perceived threat. And when you have an exaggerated stress response to perceived threat, you really do internalize it's us or them, it's kill or be killed.
Those are just human emotions. They're going to happen. You'll be aware of it so that it doesn't rule you. Question is, what's going to govern our actions? Now, let me quote you an Israeli psychiatrist who wrote a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal. He said, Israel, a country founded on the trauma of the Holocaust, raised generations of soldiers and fighters who fought to make sure Jews would never be led like lambs to the slaughter again. Turning passive into active and victim into victor is an unconscious way to manage trauma.
The reason I chose to lip sync to Gabor Mate and Katie Bogan is, first of all, I love them both and I follow them. And if you follow my channel, you know I've been lip syncing to Gabor Mate for the last 2 years in a different context about addiction, because that's a subject that is also very close to my heart. But more importantly, both Gabor and Katie grew up with real anti-Semitism, the trauma of which led them to Zionism, because first they viewed Zionism as a safe haven, an escape from the pain of anti-Semitism, but then they realized that Zionism was built on the suffering of another group of people, another group of traumatized people, the Palestinians. And to bring it back to epigenetic trauma, it's not just the old environment of the Holocaust or the memories of anti-Semitism that can affect your stress response. It's also the current environment that keeps stoking the fires of the Holocaust, keeping it alive in the minds and hearts of Jewish people. Because in the last 3 months, Israeli officials are always bringing up the Holocaust, comparing Palestinians to Nazis.
The next step is to go on the offensive and to eradicate this Nazi-type Hamas. I can tell you right now that Hamas, Nazi Hamas, is soon to feel the full wrath of the Israeli people.
And what about those Palestinians in hospital?
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you? Have you not seen what happened? We're fighting Nazis.
That's great. Keep saying it. Just keep saying it. Keep saying it out loud. And maybe you will convince Hope, because you won't be convincing anybody else, so dream on.
And yes, indeed, on October 7, murder and atrocities did occur, but they occurred by people who escaped a prison that you control. During the Nazi regime, you were imprisoned, the Jewish people were imprisoned. But now, it's the Palestinians who are imprisoned. So it is not the same. But this conflation of real anti-Semitism from the Nazi regime and imagined or perceived anti-Semitism by Palestinians is actually done by design. And not just by Israeli officials, also by American officials. American politicians who are backed by Israeli lobby groups like AIPAC. And among those US politicians is New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. She's actually a Trump loyalist whose hometown newspaper criticized her for her hateful rhetoric. This person is suddenly standing up for Jews as we watch her grill university professors who allowed pro-Palestinian rallies on campuses and changing the meaning of anti-Semitism and equating intifada with anti-Semitism.
Based upon your testimony, you understand that this call for intifada is to commit genocide against the Jewish people in Israel and globally, correct? Does that speech not call for the genocide of Jews and the elimination of Israel? You testify that you understand that is the definition of intifada.
And she knows very well that intifada does not mean the genocide of Jews. Because what intifada literally means is shaking something off. The verb intifad in Arabic is to shake something off. It's something you do in reaction. It's not something you start. It's not in any way, shape, or form meaning a genocide. But you know, I've said this in earlier videos. My favorite thing is when I see American Jews who actually call out BS on these American politicians who claim to stand up for Jews.
In our News Broke episode about why anti-Semites love Israel, which you should watch next, I explain how the right wing has effectively changed the definition of anti-Semitism from hatred of Jews to criticism of Israel, making it incredibly easy to accuse people who advocate for Palestinian rights of anti-Semitism. Remember, arguing against Israeli policy is not anti-Semitic. If it was, that would make literally every Jewish family get-together a hate crime. Hello? Is this the ADL? Yes, I would like to report my grandson!
Yeah, I just love Matt Lee. Please listen to his podcast, Bad Hasbara. It's amazing. It's like my comfort. Every time I wake up, I find a new episode. I'm like, it's usually an hour and a half long. I'm like, yes. But anyway, back to the power-hungry US politicians who use anti-Semitism. And they do it because they know that the pain that comes from the historic anti-Semitism is very real in the hearts and minds of Jewish people. They know how old that pain is.
My dad is a single dad, And he and all of his siblings were raised by this man who had been very thoroughly traumatized by the Second World War. And I think being raised in this Zionist household by a family that really believed in the promise of Israel was so central to my understanding of my Judaism when I was a child. There was a lot of kind of low-grade chronic anti-Semitism when I was growing up. My classmates made anti-Semitic jokes, jokes about, showers and gas chambers, and they'd throw up Nazi salutes in the hallway. And so when my family spoke about Israel, it was almost this fairyland, this fantasy of what safety from those microaggressions would be like.
I mean, my brother and I were at times bullied for being Jewish. I had to change classes at some point in the school I was going to. And I've talked about this once we were being bullied for being Jewish, and this friend of mine came to my defense. And here's the defense. Leave him alone. It's not his fault he's Jewish. It's a fault, but, he couldn't help it. He wasn't, That's where I grew up. And then Zionism came along. And I discovered this pride in being Jewish. No, we're no longer helpless and passive and victims. But the barbed wire of Auschwitz is now being replaced by the boundaries of a free state.
I bought into that fiction. I really wanted to believe in that fantasy. And I remember having a conversation with a very close loved ones where I said, "What about Palestinians?" And she said, "Oh, do you mean the terrorists?" And that was really the tipping point for me of realizing that there was not this pretty fancy promise of Israel that was going to be lived out by my family. Instead, there was sort of an ugly underbelly to this promise, which was having to internalize a hatred and a bias toward another group of marginalized people.
Hey y'all, it's In Denial, your drag therapist. You guys, the last video, as you can see, blew up. I'd never experienced anything like this. And it's so bittersweet because this kind of like success or kind of like the growth of my channel is something I've been wanting. And it came at such a horrible occasion, like people of Palestine are suffering. And it's just kind of my brain doesn't know what to do with that. Like I'll just play you a little clip of a boy who's like trying to drink water out of a pipe. They're drinking water out of the sea because they have no water. Just take that alone. So kids like this are being called anti-Semites. They're just trying to find water and food. And unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on how you look at it, I consume so much of this content on a daily basis that sometimes I need a timeout. So I just watch a video of a cat like as a pellet cleanser. Because sometimes you just need to stare at a cat. And speaking of the reaction to my last video, I've never had that many amount of comments, and the majority of them, I have to say, are beautiful and amazing. But you know how the ego-driven mind works? We're searching for the negative stuff. And there's been some negative stuff, which...
The vultures are waiting to pick your bones.
It's funny, like when the video hit almost 500,000 views, some part of me, it happened faster than I could think, was actually wishing for it to stop. I didn't want to grow any further. And then I had to sit with that feeling and realize, what is this about? Actually, fear, there's fear of failure, right? That everyone knows about. We're all afraid to fail. But there is fear of success, which is fear of basically having more eyes on you, which means more criticism. And you have to ask yourself, are you ready for that? And I am ready because I believe in my heart what I'm doing. And I do take my time, as you know, from how long I take to finish every video, I do take my time. So this is very careful and measured, but I thought it's interesting to share. But the most interesting type of reaction to analyze in relation to the Palestine-Israel situation is those Zionists who write, but you don't understand what it's like here. You don't get it. Which is exactly like a person who's stuck in an abusive relationship and they go like, but you don't get it. He loves me. You don't understand. Actually, we get it. We see clearer because we're outside. And he does not love you. Israel does not love you. It's trapping you. Because for an Israeli to admit that Israel is committing these horrible crimes is like facing the fact that your parent could be a murderer and a criminal. That shit is hard to do. But girl, your daddy is a fucked. But speaking of in denial, I'm in denial. Please subscribe to my channel. And I want to thank all the people who donated, by the way, and the new members. Love you guys. And speaking of the donations, please don't stop yourself from using the super thanks, because the last video, it was monetized for a few days, but then it got demonetized because YouTube decided that it's not advertiser friendly. And the first video I did about Palestine, which is Jews crying out for Palestine, the first one was demonetized from the get-go. So feel free to show me some love in the form of a super thanks. But if not, thank you for watching. I love you anyway. And now let's get back to the subject of this video, the types of anti-Semitism. There are two types. And actually the two types can be summed up in a story I recently heard. I was at a poetry reading, a spoken word performance dedicated to Palestine in Amsterdam a few weeks ago. And one of the people who spoke was a Palestinian who has Israeli citizenship. And he was telling us about his journey through Germany. And he had to take a cab from one part of Germany to another. I think it was from Berlin to Frankfurt or something like that. And he rode with a German cab driver who at first thought he was Israeli because of the Israeli passport and was being very like, But then when he found out he's Palestinian, he was so welcoming and started to kind of like just express the real anti-Semitism in his heart. So on one side, you've got this Palestinian who's trying to be as careful as possible as he travels through Europe, not to be thought of as anti-Semitic because he isn't. And then you have a real anti-Semite who's like congratulating him on being Palestinian just because in his mind a Palestinian is the enemy of Jews. It's insane. Which is actually a very nice reminder that real anti-Semitism is actually not in the Middle East. It's in Europe, babe, and the US. Because anger towards Israel in the Arab world is actually anger towards an oppressive force that brands itself as Jewish and wears the pain of the Holocaust like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like the CEO of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League in the US, he was recently talking about how there's an increase, a 300 or 400% increase in anti-Semitic attacks since October 7. Honey, it is not since October 7. It is since the massacre started. If anything, when October 7 started, people were very sympathetic towards the state of Israel and Jews. Actually, in the very beginning, here, if you would talk to anyone, people were like, I don't know, like what Palestinians are doing to Jews. People were actually feeling a lot of sympathy. But actually, the anger started after the massacre on Gaza started. So it's not since October 7. This reframing is very diabolical, by the way.
Big companies too, like Starbucks is being targeted for reasons that escape me because the CEO isn't Jewish and the company has no stores in Israel.
Really, girl? It escapes you? I don't get it. The CEO isn't even Jewish. Once again, very deceptively making this a Jewish thing. People are angry at Starbucks and other corporations that help Israel because they support the military. Actually, the fact that the CEO is not Jewish is proof that this is not about being anti-Semitic. But of course, they have to keep making it about anti-Semitism.
We've seen coordinated efforts to do things like, quote, target Zionist businesses. I think you and your audience knows there's no such thing as a Zionist business. That's a euphemism for Jewish.
And actually, this has been going on way before October 7 of last year. In fact, in 2011, there was an exhibition for art by children from Gaza in Portland in the US, and it was stopped at the last minute, and the drawings of the children were taken as evidence of anti-Semitism because the children had drawings of, basically they were depicting their lives. When these kids draw the Star of David on planes and bombs, that's an accurate depiction of the world that they see because their interaction with Jews is the military. They're not being anti-Semitic. Again, because the state of Israel brands itself as a Jewish state. So of course, people are going to perceive these attacks by Jews, especially someone as simple as a child. So anyway, let's break down the two types of anti-Semitism, the very real one and the imagined or perceived one. So let's start with the first type, which is the real anti-Semitism. And I think it has three faces. You have the neo-Nazis, you have the Holocaust deniers, and the third type, which is like covert anti-Semitism. So the first one, the neo-Nazis. These neo-Nazis spray swastikas on synagogues and they desecrate graves. And this group of people, their actions certainly need to be monitored and banned. But they don't have any real political future. And for anyone who cites the rise of Trump and his supporters as a sign of the impending anti-Semitism, you're actually being very naive because Trump, like any American politician, understands that without full support for the state of Israel, he will never gain political power.
Walls work, just ask Israel.
And then you have another phase, which is the Holocaust deniers. Those people deny the existence of things like the Nazi gas chambers, and you should never fall into their trap because that's what they want, for you to start negotiating with them. Like Noam Chomsky actually made the mistake of starting a debate with them because Noam Chomsky actually believes in everyone's right to freedom of expression, but actually because he engaged Holocaust deniers in a debate, he got accused of being anti-Semitic, which couldn't be farther from the truth.
My question is specifically about Iran and the nuclear weapons. What do you do when a country is openly trying to develop one or obtain one, openly threatening to wipe out a country and claiming that a country shouldn't exist?
Well, actually, I happen to agree with that too. In fact, so do a lot of people in Israel, the ones who think there should be a single democratic state. That's not calling for wiping anyone out. There are two countries that are not only calling for some nation not to exist, but are destroying it, namely the U.S. and Israel. That's their position with regard to the Palestinians. They're not just saying it, they're doing it day by day.
And then you have the third phase of real anti-Semitism, which is covert anti-Semitism. And this is a more polite, more hypocritical form of the anti-Semitism that was there before World War II. These people hate Jews more privately and express it in covert statements like, oh, there sure are a lot of Jews around here. It's the kind of statements that Kanye West makes.
You just get used to getting screwed by the Jewish media.
Only Kanye is less anti-Semitic and more, you know what Kanye's like. But this kind of covert anti-Semitism is the kind that you keep to yourself and only express in the company of your people, people who agree with you, which is actually all the more proof that someone like Kanye West is not anti-Semitic because he just blurts things out. Because people who are covertly anti-Semitic, they are very smart to know when to say it. These people are horrible and they should be avoided. So let's go to the second type of anti-Semitism, the imagined or perceived anti-Semitism. And that has two forms. The first form is the fear-based hysteria over any support of Palestinian people and linking it to the Holocaust immediately. Like a perfect example of that is the comedian Amy Schumer, who's talking about fearing for the life of her baby in Beverly Hills. Honey, Hamas is not flying down on paragliders into Beverly Hills to take your baby. You're not helping, girl. But again, she believes that stuff because hysteria feels very real for the person.
This woman threw hot coffee at a man for wearing a Palestinian scarf while playing with his toddler in a playground.
Why? What?
I think one of the things that makes this situation so complicated is that Jewish people really do have not only a history of being oppressed. We've seen this from, being expelled from every place where we settled for thousands of years, and then the huge mass trauma and casualty of the Holocaust, the brutality of the Holocaust, but ongoing anti-Semitism. And so this is one of the few instances in history, I think, where the people who are being oppressive, the Israeli government, which is being so oppressive on behalf of the Jewish people, is able to point to very legitimate historical oppression.
And generally, once you identify with a group, a sense of victimization comes very easy.
And the second phase of the imagined anti-Semitism takes the form of performative love for Jews, which is so hypocritical and basically a mask for the hatred of another group of people. And this is embodied beautifully by American politicians.
A lot of people are surprised by Senator John Fetterman being the biggest advocate for Israel in the Democratic Party. You go up to his office, and it's like his whole door is plastered with pictures of the hostages. I don't know. I walked through the Senate the other day, like every door is like the hostages or a trans flag. Hostages, trans flag. That's American politics today.
Just cosplaying causes just to help their career. It's disgusting. And to be honest, I think there's a third phase of this imagined anti-Semitism, which takes on the form of misplaced guilt over the Holocaust. And this is very popular here in Europe because of the history of what happened to Jews here in Europe. But this one I feel deserves another video because I can talk a lot about it from the perspective of a Palestinian living in Europe. So if you want to see a video about that, let me know in the comments. But for now, let's take a deep dive and dissect the two forms of the imagined anti-Semitism. It's true that there is real anger and resentment towards the state of Israel by a large number of people all around the world. Not only Arabs in the diaspora, but so many marginalized people like African Americans, queer people, just so many. But the hostility of all those people, a lot of them are young, is fundamentally bound up in what's happening in Palestine. And they see that over there, Jewish Israelis are oppressing Palestinians. Palestinians whom they consider as their brothers and sisters in oppression, in marginalization, in injustice. And again, what these young people feel is not a hostility towards Jews, but a hostility towards an oppressor who presents himself as Jewish. And Israel here has done a real disservice to its people by convincing a lot of Jews that they and their safety is forever bound up with Israel.
As a Jewish person, you are saddled with the idea that you are not a citizen of America or a citizen of the world. You are a citizen of Israel. And you must back their actions.
And Israelis are told that they are safe as long as Palestinians are being punished for their crimes, completely overlooking the fact that Palestinians are being punished for resisting occupation. And it's very true that Palestinians' resistance to occupation is sometimes violent. And that's because anytime Palestinians try to resist non-violently, their resistance, the non-violent resistance, was crushed brutally. Like, have you ever heard of the Great March of Return in 2018? When Palestinians were walking peacefully, with no weapons, nothing, towards the wall, the fence, and they were shot down by snipers like birds.
Look it up. Look it up.
But let's go with the narrative that all Palestinian resistance is violent. Okay, let's go with that. Yes, the resistance is violent, is extreme, but it's not anti-Semitic. In fact, there's a story that sums this up beautifully. Tragically, but beautifully. Have you heard of Miko Peled? He wrote this book called The General's Son. His grandfather actually signed the Declaration of Independence for Israel. His father was a general in the 1967 army. This is a hardcore Zionist family. And now he's one of the most staunch activists for Palestine. And his sister, Nurit Peled, who I referenced in my last videos, she writes these books about Israeli education and how it paints Palestinians as terrorists. Yeah. Nurit's daughter was killed by a suicide bomber in the late 90s. And if after such a devastating loss of your daughter and your niece to a suicide bomber, you can still ask the question, why are Palestinians doing this? And realize that it's not anti-Semitic. Yes, it's of course horrific and violent to lose someone in that way, but still have the moral courage to ask, but okay, what is this about? Why are they doing this? If they can ask that question, I think anybody should be able to.
I always say big shifts in our thinking, in our ideology, sadly happen usually as a result of a tragedy. And so in my case, my sister's little girl was killed in a suicide attack. 3 young Palestinians decided to kill themselves, blow themselves up, and take civilians around them, including this 13-year-old girl who happened to be my sister's little girl. We tend to talk about these enormously horrifying events in passing. There was a suicide attack, 5 people were killed, moving on. There's another attack, 20 people were killed, moving on. Nobody ever takes a pause and say, what happened? We can't just let it go. We've got to talk about this. We got to figure out what in the world, how does this happen? What kind of environment was created that this kind of tragedy can take place?
But instead of Jewish people with integrity like Miko Peled and many others like Jewish Voices for Peace, what you have instead in the forefront promoted by the State of Israel are organizations like the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, who are constantly trying to frame any resistance of Palestinians as anti-Semitic. And actually, in a very unintentionally comedic turn of events, in 2014, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, conducted a survey all around the world and also including the West Bank, a survey to measure anti-Semitism, because that's all they do. And they surveyed people in the West Bank, Palestinians in the West Bank, Palestinians who are under military occupation. And one of the questions they used to measure how anti-Semitic Palestinians are, they asked them, do you think Jews have any control here? Duh. That's like asking prisoners in a prison guard, do you think the prison guards are in control here? The answer to that is objectively yes. You're not anti-Semitic if you point it out. So again, extremely dishonest. Always twisting the facts. To them, everything is anti-Semitic. At this point, being Palestinian is about to become anti-Semitic. Every Palestinian man is violent. And let me tell you something, speaking of Palestinian men, there's an animal shelter in Gaza that's still operating now by a Palestinian man who's going around rescuing dogs, cats, and donkeys. And as Israel drops its leaflets warning people to move, he takes all the animals and moves. These are Palestinian men. But actually, we need to stop this. You know why? Because these cats, they're anti-Semitic. Yeah, they are. IDF, smoke their ass. Yalla, Hysteria. Thank you. Ooh, you better work. Yes. Slay, mama, slay, slay. Slay those children. Speaking of slaying Palestinian children, there was a baby girl, a Palestinian baby girl, an anti-Semitic baby, of course. She was born at the beginning of this war, of this massacre, 3 months ago. And all her family were killed throughout this massacre. And last week, she died alone in a tent. Yeah, girl. These are the anti-Semites that we need to get rid of. Yes. But speaking of the trauma of Palestinian children, Gabor Mate has a lot to say about that, actually, because he grew up as a true survivor of the Holocaust because his grandparents and most of his family were killed, and he survived with his mother, and they kept moving around. And eventually his mother had to give him up to be raised by relatives for a while because she couldn't take it, because obviously she was completely traumatized herself.
This is a story I've told before, but the day after the Germans marched into Budapest, there was this phone call by my mother to the pediatrician to say, would you please come and see my son, because he's crying all the time. And then the pediatrician said, yes, of course I'll come, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying. And that sorrow that I ingested from my mother has been in me all my life. And I'm thinking of all the crying babies now, especially right now in Gaza with the bombing.
But unfortunately, so far, not enough people are able to link their pain as Jewish people to the pain of Palestinians. They still find it easy to reduce the Palestinian struggle to something like anti-Semitism.
And it's horrifying to me to see people who I think of as critical thinkers and thought leaders wholesale accept the representation of Palestine that is being disseminated by Western news media. It's devastating. Something that's important to keep in mind, too, is the most recent sort of population polls in Palestine still show that Hamas doesn't have majority support. But every time there is a conflict with Israel, every time Israel is aggressive, of course, support for Hamas increases. Palestinians see Hamas as really their only defender against the chronic oppression and violence that's perpetrated by Israel. And what do we think happens for popular support for Hamas when Israel behaves aggressively to this degree? You have a whole population of people now who are watching their friends and families die. And you think these people are not going to be willing to become martyrs? They have nothing left to live for. You've annihilated their community. You've massacred their loved ones. You've traumatized them. Their mental health symptoms are through the roof. Of course Hamas is going to have an easier time recruiting.
Now let's go to the second phase of imagined anti-Semitism, the performative love for Jews. Basically, it's only a hate crime when it happens to Jewish people. In the West today, it is of course horrific to desecrate synagogues and be anti-Jewish, which is as it should be. But unfortunately, there are still a lot of votes to be won by denouncing Islam. Like we have our upcoming Prime Minister here, Geert Wilders, in the Netherlands, who openly says he wants less Muslims in the country. And this guy, by the way, visited Israel around 40 times. So why the hypocrisy around loving Jewish people but accepting Islamophobia? Why are they able to call out the injustice only to some people? Bottom line is that these people's support for the Zionist project is that they see themselves in Israelis.
And Zionism has always prioritized this land as being a homeland for Ashkenazi Jews. So these are Jews that are essentially white, Jews from Europe and Eastern Europe, not Mizrahi Jews, not Sephardic Jews, who would be the Jews that were, Spanish or from Morocco and Northern Africa, really prioritizing the settlement of white Jews for the establishment of this homeland.
There are around 120,000 Ethiopian Jews in Israel. Many of them live in these underprivileged areas and struggle to integrate. But leaders of their community say that over the last 10 years, the number of births of Ethiopian Jews has dropped by half. Some women say they were coerced into taking injections every 3 months for birth control.
And to be even more honest, the reason why a lot of people in the West love the idea that Jews can live in Israel is because actually they don't want Jews around.
And at the end of World War II, there was this horrific, traumatized population of Jewish people that needed to be resettled outside of Eastern Europe, where so much of their trauma and pain had been experienced. And there was this push to move Jews out of Eastern Europe and this movement of Jews to kind of escape, because who wants to stay in the land where they were just traumatized? And there were about 100,000 to 120,000 Jews that needed to be resettled very quickly at the end of the war. And the United States, because the United States was still very anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish sentiment was still very loud at this time, did not want to resettle 100,000 Jews in the US. And Britain did not want to resettle 100,000 Jews in the UK. And here was this land of Palestine surrounded by Arab and Muslim neighbors in the Levant, which was an area that had not yet been effectively colonized, that was still sort of in the process of colonization. And you had this convenient group of 100,000 traumatized refugees that neither the United States or Britain wanted, that could be resettled on a parcel of land and tasked essentially with doing military labor for the West.
So Israel was birthed from this combination of a traumatized Jewish people and the need for the US and the UK to colonize the Middle East. The US and the UK didn't do it out of love for Jews. They gifted Palestinian land to Jewish people to maintain military stronghold in the Middle East. And this stronghold is maintained through the very intense, brutal subjugation of Palestinians. And the way they've normalized the subjugation of Palestinians in the eyes of people in the West is by convincing them that there's a unity and a link between the struggle of Europeans and Americans against the Arab fundamentalists, the Islamic fundamentalists, and the struggle of Israeli people against the Islamic fundamentalists in Palestine. It's like we share the same struggle. And it's actually the most disgusting when liberal Zionists say that. Like Sam Harris, oh my God, this type is the worst. Like Sam Harris, Bill Maher, who think they're so liberal and progressive, but they can barely contain their racism. Like when Sam Harris appeared on Piers Morgan.
What I'm going to say is it should just be obvious to everyone, which is that we have a vast number of people in the Muslim community worldwide, not just in the occupied territories or in Gaza, who are powerfully deranged by religious symbols and their religious identity, which is to say it is the most important thing to them, but more important even than the deaths of their own children. Again, I'm not talking about just Palestinians. I'm talking about the Muslim community worldwide in dozens of countries that has produced a seemingly unending supply of suicide bombers, or literally like rigging children to explode.
And they keep talking about Arabs and Muslims being violent, as if America is like a hippie commune where everyone is peaceful. You are the mother of violence and oppression and cruelty. Like right now where they're bombing Yemen. And Yemen, the Yemen Houthis who are attacking the ships, they killed no one. 0 people were killed by Yemenis. And in fact, they've allowed Chinese and Russian ships to go through, and they've clearly stated that we're stopping these ships because of what Israel is doing to Palestinians. Again, non-violently, they killed no one. And what did the US do? Just bomb them. Violence is the only thing the United States and, by extension, Israel understands. You get a bomb, you get a bomb, you get a bomb. The United States of America!
You need to cut the you really do, okay? Just cut the okay?
And actually, the American journalist Abby Martin says it beautifully, how she summed up the United States.
But I think when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. There is no strategy behind it other than all we have is military might. I mean, the United States is basically just an empty suit run by like missile companies. And so all they see is like, let's bomb the problem. Like if you look back and you're like, oh, how come we didn't learn the lessons of the Iraq War or Vietnam? Like there are no lessons to be gleaned by an empire that is belligerent and out of control.
Where do we go from here?
I know this is also bleak, but there's good news in all of this. The epigenetic trauma that's stuck in the bodies of those people who perceive Palestinian resistance as anti-Semitic can actually be reversed. Through a variety of psychotherapeutic interventions, they can start to notice how the unresolved trauma can actually affect their stress response, the trauma response. Basically learning how your body works and going to therapy and maybe meeting a Palestinian. And before I leave you with final words from Gabor and Katie, I would like to ask you to subscribe, please. And if you find it in your heart to donate and give me some super thanks, that would be amazing. And in this final bit, Gabor talks beautifully about becoming disillusioned and waking up to the reality of Zionism.
I'm saying to people, it's not a bad thing to be disillusioned. Would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? Would you rather believe in a world that does not root itself in reality? Or would you rather know what's going on? It's painful to be disillusioned. If you really want to know the truth, you're going to have to suffer pain because you've identified with something. And letting go of a piece of your identity, not of your true self, but what you've made yourself the same as.
It's so devastating that there's this conflict because Palestinians and Jews have so much in common. All throughout history, no one has wanted either one of them. That just hits for me. There's something so profound and beautiful about this shared compassion that can come from shared suffering. And if we were to approach this from a love ethic, from a peace ethic, what lessons could be taught to the world about forgiveness and empathy and the capacity of human beings to build safety for one another?